Today's meditation, we are reading from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 34, verses 1 to 12. Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land, Gilead as far as Dan, all the Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negeb, and the plain, that is, the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar. And the Lord said to him, This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to your offspring. I have left you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab opposite Beth Peor. But no one knows the place of his burial to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was undimmed and his vigor unabated. And the people of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. And the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. And Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. So the people of Israel obeyed him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. And there was not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. None like him for all the signs and wonders that the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants, and to all his land, and for all the mighty power and all the great deeds of terror that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. Here in this chapter, we see the death and burial of Moses. Probably this chapter was added by Joshua after the death of Moses. We see the life of Moses in three phases. The first 40 in Egypt, moved with the nobles and a man mighty in word and in deed. He also inherited the quick temper and zeal of his great-grandfather Levi, for he killed an Egyptian supporting a fellow Israelite. The second 40 years was spent in the wilderness, tending the flocks of his father-in-law. These were times where he was alone, and God met him in the burning bush and assigned him the task of taking the Israelites from Egypt. We know more of Moses because of the next 40 years. We know him as Israel's leader, their prophet, their intercessor, and their mediator with God. The only link with their God was through Moses, for they said, You speak to us and we will listen. Let not God speak to us. He was also at the receiving end of all their murmurings and complaints. Every time they ran into a problem, they were rebellious and started to complain. In the end, he also spoke unadvisedly and incurred the wrath of God. After God pronounced his judgment that he will not enter the promised land, he did not spout or leave the ministry that God gave him. He continued faithfully in fulfilling all that God commanded him. He took the discipline of God in the right way and finished well. Along with Paul, he could say, I have fought a good fight, finished my course, and kept my faith. Now I am awaiting a crown of righteousness. He willfully obeyed the Lord in climbing the Mount Nebo to see the promised land from afar off. He knew that he cannot go in, but enjoy the land from afar off. Hebrews 11:13 is very true about him. They all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of the land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. A lot of titles would have fitted Moses. He was their deliverer, their leader, their intercessor, their provider, and the list can go on. But the Spirit of God chooses the title Moses, the servant of the Lord. When God addresses Joshua, he declares, my servant Moses. This is the greatest honor that could be bestowed upon a child of God. Paul and other apostles introduced themselves as the bond slaves of Jesus Christ in their epistles. Two things are evident of a slave. Firstly, he belongs to his master. Secondly, his interests are identical with those of his master. Moses was described as a unique prophet known by the Lord. A prophet is the mouthpiece of God who declares the words of God to the people. He should also be known by God. 1 Corinthians chapter 8 verse 3. But if someone loves God, he is known by God. In Galatians 4:9, also we read the same idea. We can take the comfort in the fact that God is sovereign over the time and manner of our deaths. We need not be stressed about death and the manner of our death. We are only required to live in faith that issues in obedience to Him all our lives. Psalms 116 verse 15 says, "Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of His saints." From our birth to our death, God ordains and records it. Psalms 139 verse 16, "Your eyes saw me when I was inside the womb. All the days ordained for me were recorded in your scroll before one of them came into existence." Even the greatest of leaders may die with disappointments and unanswered prayers. At first, Moses entreated the Lord to let him cross over into the land. But when the Lord told Moses in Deuteronomy 3:26, "Enough, speak to me no more of this matter," Moses submitted to God's discipline. At that point, his concern was for the people. He asked the Lord to appoint a successor, and the Lord directed him to appoint Joshua. But the Lord graciously allowed Moses to go up on the mountain and get this view of the promised land. Even though Moses was 120, God graciously ensured that he retained undiminished strength to climb this high mountain all alone, and the eyesight to see the distant horizons of the land. And there the Master buried his faithful servant. Moses had two unfulfilled prayers. One was in Exodus chapter 33, verse 18, "Show me your glory." The second one was here, "Let me cross over and see the fair land." Deuteronomy 3:25. Though but by the God's grace, both were eventually answered. On the Mount of Transfiguration, Moses stood along with Elijah. He saw Jesus in his glory, and he stood in the promised land. All our good desires will be fulfilled in Him one day. We need not be disappointed if they could not be met here on earth. We may die with disappointments and unanswered prayers, but the glory of Christ and the blessing of heaven will more than make up for all our disappointments. Let us be faithful servants of our good Lord. Let us fix our eyes on Him, away from our own plans and longings. He is the one who finishes our faith. With the great hope of His high calling before our faltering eyes, we may press on to know Him and trust that His perfect will comes to fruit in our lives. God bless.